Hey everybody, I just want to give you guys a heads up. During the stream, we ended up having a bit of an audio glitch that I didn't notice until just now as I'm editing the stream and putting everything together into two different clips. Anytime you see one of these, which is a little tiny square in the bottom right-hand corner, which is the picture-in-picture, showing Andrew alongside of either the content, his code, or the presentation, we ended up having this double audio effect due to the camera, the HD camera, having the audio signal coming from that and the lapel mic. So I do apologize for this. I've tried going in and cleaning this up, but anything I do just messes it up completely and simply makes it worse. So please bear with it if you can. There's some really good content, and it only happens when that picture is down in the right-hand corner there. So make comments about this by all means. If you have a solution and you know of some way of getting rid of that very, very effectively, please let me know. I will be paying attention to this very, very closely. I have the full suite for Creative Suite, so Adobe Audition and Premiere. So if you know of any of the tools, please let me know. Anyway, good luck and enjoy the video.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. Okay, so where we last left off at was the object-oriented graphic user interface and introducing to some of the objects and the players that are involved with maintaining a good response to the website. So now we're going to go back into the Lucid Life mode, and I'm going to show you some of the tasks that we have working on Lucid Life. So I mentioned that we have some objects, and there are two types of objects that we have. We need to find them as a container. These would be like your light boxes, perhaps. As you can see, we've got a couple of these light boxes. And then there's a template. Templates are things that you reuse, reorder, distribute in different places and areas of your site. Lucid Life, as I explained, has our strongest one is the user badge. So I'll be able to bring up the website on the screen. It's coming. So our user badge is more than what it appears to be. Right now you're seeing a bunch of little rectangle things with some pictures in it and stuff like that, but that's on the surface. In the stream mode, because we're actually in the stream member here, you're seeing it in that mode. If I was to pull that badge out and place it into a different container, it will look entirely different. For instance, one way that you could see a difference is, Sharif, if you click on one of these connects, you'll see that it's still a user badge, but now, there's two more actors in here. Remember I talked about the supporting staff and things like that? These are the guys that are in there, they're hiding in the back. So sometimes they come on stage, sometimes they go off in the back. But the main guy is always pretty much up there 90% of the time. If you were to try to send a message to yourself, you had to click yourself, didn't you? So, I can go click somebody else. I went to profile. Okay, so if you send a message, you'll see that it just keeps expanding. So all these little supporting actors are all hidden within this object. And I can pull them in and pluck them out at will. And what's actually controlling that is the actors, when you click on them, are telling the control systems that, hey, I clicked on this, what do you want me to do? Oh, let's apply the class of the message head, and let's apply the slide down technique. So these little controllers kind of have the blueprint to what's going to happen at every particular action. Okay, so that's the objects. Can we split screen? Thanks, Matthew. There we go. All right. So we were talking about the extras, and I was talking about, so the main nav has a bunch of extras in there. Sharif, if you just kind of like go through the main nav, like maybe look what's under the profile, what's under the thoughts, and stuff like that. So I'll show you right now that you could tell here that I completely come off the grid. So I'm actually using grid within the body section here. But I'm only using the full 12 grid, and I actually define my own columns within inside. So when you're working with a grid, you have to think that you don't always have to stay rigid to it. You can work within it yourself, so long as you're keeping in mind that you are within a certain space and you're using your proper percentages, right? So what I've done is, because I'm tired of some of the cumbersome menus that you have, and they all look the same, I've actually wanted my app to actually feel and work almost like you're on a computer system. So when you open up, say, the thoughts thing, I call this an active menu because you can actually work within it. Normally, you'd have to click to this in a mobile app, and you'd go to another page that you could do all these controls with, and you click back to go to another page. I want you to be able to like go through your hot thoughts, go through some of the thoughts that you've been in, and you can delete them if you want to, and things like that, just by hovering over them and opening and closing them by having an accordion. So the menu is more of an active state menu. So these are some of the things that you can do once you kind of define your objects, and those nav items are actual objects. The third piece of the puzzle are the classifiers. Now, these are the guys I was telling you that have the instructions. They're saying, oh, you're looking at this object on this page, and you're this user. And you're on a device tablet, and it's in portrait mode. These are the guys that have all that kind of information in, and they kind of say, oh, you're in that mode, let's throw this out at you. Let's throw this out at you. They're kind of the control officers. And I call them classifiers literally because that's what they do. They simply place classes on your object. That's it. I have classifiers on your orientation. So if most of you guys use Modernizer, great thing to have if you're doing responsive design, by the way, it throws all the classes and all the features that are available on that device within the HTML tag as classes. So if you were in IE 8 and you went to a site that had Modernizer on it, if you check the classes out in HTML, you wouldn't see background size there because IE 8 doesn't support that CSS3 feature. So you can use those classes to apply to the cascading of your CSS automatically. So I'll know when I'm constructing my CSS, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute, that sometimes you'll see me have overrides where if the body tag is this, or the HTML tag has this class, I'm going to adjust my CSS. So we're making full use of the power of the CSS. And I very rarely touch JavaScript actually on the site. And you'll see how I do it. Okay, so some of the types of classifiers you have, like I said, are page classes. You have section classes. So this would be a section, which I call the stream section. And this section over here would be the activity section. Oh, sorry, did I move out of the cameras? Oh, not even okay, good. So depending on where that badge is positioned, they look different. So you can see the badge looks one way here, and all of a sudden when you move it to the stream, the picture is half the size. I show a little bit of the message preview, and if you were in the Connect, you see a little bit different version. A matter of fact, Sharif, if you go to a profile view, and mind you, this profile view is very ugly. Keep in mind, we're still in beta mode. This is actually that same badge that you're seeing in all those streams. All I've done is blown it out. So now I'm showing some of the extra information that is normally hidden. There is a biography tool that's closed up and not used, and there's also an auxiliary set on the right-hand side that is also contained in this object. I'm going to show you right now what this object looks like in HTML, and I'm going to show you the CSS that I apply to it, and I'll show you how I kind of work the Puppeteers for the controllers and classifiers. So with that said, you can get off that ugly profile page. And let's see if I can dig into some code here. Okay, so before we get onto that, let me minimize. All right, I've got a split screen here. This is showing, the top half is showing HTML, and oh, we might want to go full screen here. Yeah, thank you very much. What? You know I'm not on Apple, right? Yeah. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, what's a good size? Yeah, we have to blow this up.
Can we read this?
People in the back, I don't know if you're going to be able to read this stuff.
We'll have it online as well later on.
All right, here, I'll blow it up as big as I can go. All right, there we go. Okay, so now I mentioned that we have containers and we have templates. So I'm looking specifically right now at one of my containers, which happens to be the lightboxes section. So I kind of segment my HTML out into these blocks of code, so I know where everything is. Now the good thing about blocking your code off is that you can do so much really cool things when you have things kind of situated in a specific format. For instance, on my HTML page, I actually have this lightbox div that's just a hide statement that's placed on it, and it contains a bunch of other lightboxes. So here we see the My Settings lightbox. Next, we're going to see my Stream Filter lightbox. Down here, we're going to have some other stuff. What do we have? The Connect lightbox. So whenever you click on a badge, this is the lightbox that shows up that has all the information in it. And obviously the login lightbox. So these are just what I call containers. They're containers for content, or containers for other objects and templates. So scrolling down, I'm going to go past my containers, and notice that that whole site only has about 3 or 4 containers. I reuse them in different ways. Then we move into the templates section. So the templates, these are my big heavy lifters I was talking about, the objects. So my big object was the user badge. Let me give you a bit more of a view of it here. So when I'm defining my badge, I'm using the term article. Actually, let's take a minute to talk about some semantic HTML. Does anyone know what I mean by semantic? I mean really semantic. Grammar, I heard, something like that. Using meaning. And it sometimes goes beyond just meaning. I mean, it's using the right element for the right place. For instance, if somebody sends a message, I encase that message in a block quote. Not many people do that. Why would I encase it in a block quote? Well, a block quote is specifically for that. This is something coming from someone that's saying something. It immediately tells you exactly. You don't have to think about what it is. You know what it is. Also, robots and SEO engines and stuff like that will read those quotes. So if somebody is looking specifically for quotes about something, they'll actually dig into blog quotes and pull those things out. This, knowing how to use semantic will actually put you far ahead of your competition in the Google searches, because they're now using semantic search. So keep that in mind when you're doing stuff. When you're putting things in a nav, perhaps, or you're putting things in a footer, HTML5 provides you with those kind of element names. So if you're putting stuff in a footer, use the footer tag. If you're putting stuff in a nav, use the nav tag, and so forth. I'm choosing to use article for every badge, because this is my main guide. Normally this would be like a story or a news report of some kind, or a blog entry or something. But for Lucid Life, it's those badges. So, what do I have in here? Well, I got my class name on it, user badge, and what do you know? What's all this funky stuff going on in here? I'm using a lot of attributes in here. Now, these are the data attributes. One note I want to tell you about using data attributes is that so long you can create any attribute you want in your tag, so long as it starts with the word data hyphen. The reason why you want to keep it started with data hyphen is because it actually validates. It will not validate if you put something that's current user in there. You'll actually have validation issues. So keep that in mind. Also, it helps you when you're using libraries like jQuery, where before we used to always have to use the attrib kind of command to grab and select. You can now use the data. And instead of saying, back in the day, like say to connect to data current user, you would use your selector.attr brackets quotes data current user quotes brackets. Now you can use their .data and just say current user. You don't have to use the data thing, so it kind of helps you out. Let's see, what else do you have here? So notice that I'm using some weird little things in here. Does anybody know what these guys are? They are exactly that. I am using an old and ancient, probably the most oldest and ancient way of swapping in information called token replacement. We're going back to like 80s or something. So it works well, and that's why I use it. So when I'm pulling in data and information that I want to keep track of, and I don't want to have to always go back to the database, or I don't want to have something cached and stuff like that, you can use these attributes to store some of your information in. Make sure they're not some of the more, security-based ones. You don't want to have too much of that stuff up front end. But I'll tell you why it comes in handy for me. I don't use it to select the DOMs. I use it that when I click on a button, I go to the parent that I'm in, which in this case would be the user badge article, and I can find out that, oh, you're clicking on the user ID, because I'm checking out the current user attribute, and I can pluck that out, and then I know exactly what to send. I don't have to make any database calls, I don't have to go through any kind of cache type thing, they're right there on the DOM. And with that said, you don't want to put all your information in there, and you don't want to always be searching for DOMs, because searching through the DOM is very expensive. So imagine on Lucid Life, we have, let's say there's 1,000 people in a particular stream. Imagine the number of badges, the number of objects that are being displayed there. It's vast. It'll actually slow down the browser to have that many objects running. So there's a couple of things you can kind of invoke to help you out with that stuff. I'll pause and take a minute to tell you about one thing. So sites like a Tiger Direct, Canadian Tire, Best Buy, things that have hundreds, like Amazon, things that have hundreds and hundreds of products, and depending on your search, you can get massive lists. Now, yes, they try to help out the client side by limiting that to maybe 100 per page or whatever it is through pagination. But there's even a way that you can do that Facebook actually does very well, and some other sites. I don't know if you've ever noticed, as you scroll down, say, a Facebook page, it only gives you a certain amount of information. And as you get closer to the bottom, you get more information. So that's just another Ajax call to pull this stuff in. So that's one technique. And another technique is called recycling. So basically you have a factory. Now, I've set my factory limit to say 100 badges. I don't want to produce more than 100 badges in my stream. But I happen to have 500 people in that stream. How's that going to work? They're not going to see the rest of the people. Well, I'll tell you how I do it. One approach is I cache what I pull from the server. And these are all speed and efficiency stuff. So this is kind of off of responsive, but it's going to help you out in the future. Whenever I make a call, like a stream person pings into the stream, I record that person's user object. So all the information comes in and I store it in an application server variable that I've created. It's a JSON object that sits. I'm going to show it to you. I'll show you the code later. I'm doing let's load this guy.
Good. Yep. A little smaller if you want.
All right, good.
There you go.
Okay. So, first of all, I have a session where it doesn't have anything in it. Doesn't have anything in it. But, as you move down, you see my application variable. Those is created every time one application is open. So, what I have here, I basically define my object, I give some report information, I store a lot of certain kind of detectors and stuff in here, things like whether this device is touch enabled, and I even store the user agent, because sometimes I kind of dig into there to see kind of what else I can tweak out of it. Now, you'll see under, let's pick out something here. Okay, let's look at this. So remember I was showing you some of the objects that I have, and I said some of them are containers and some of them are templates. And remember I told you that if you define them properly in the bottom of your HTML page, in a nice block, nice and tidy, you can do many things for one. It doesn't even have to exist in the HTML document. You can load your page without that and Ajax that stuff in behind. So it gives you a faster load presence. When you Ajax that stuff in, or whether you read it in at the page launch, you store them in your object variable. So here, these are my different templates. I have my message area, you saw my user badge, I have a member list, I have a bunch of other things in here. What I'm actually doing is I'm going to my HTML, and I'm grabbing that snippet of code, and I'm storing it in this object. Now, some of you guys notice that I'm using JSON, but I'm also using this weird thing here. I'm sticking words into where normally an array number would be. So this is how I'm applying a new technique that I call basically indexed JSON. So it's kind of like building an associate array, right? So now, how does this help me out? Whenever I get a mail message from a member, say 5 people message me, I don't want to have to, every time I want to look at a message, I want to call back to the server and see what they sent me. I want to store that information that they sent. So I have a variable for that. It's called message member. If I went on the site right now, I could actually break out the doc. Actually, would you be able to look at the DOM for that? And then when you get it, you can tell Matthew, and he'll switch over, I guess. Oh, you don't have to switch yet, Matthew. You can let Sharif look. Fine. All right, Sharif, go do it. Look up maybe the message member DOM, and I'll show you how I store these things. So when you store them now, whenever I want to go back to the message, I can populate my menu. So remember I had that active menu that drops down and has all my members in there. I populate it actually from that cached variable. So I can go back at any time. If any new messages come in, they just append to that variable. I'm not even touching DOMs at this state. I'm just throwing stuff into variables. Now, the cool thing about using my associative technique, so where I'm actually giving these names, what comes in handy here is normally with a JSON object, as you're aware of, whenever you add some nodes to it, it'll add it as a number. So if I had 100 badges in the stream come in, every one of these guys have their own unique user ID, right? It could be 1, could be 5, could be 6, could be 7. Normally with JSON, when that comes in, you have 100 users, and I wanted to get the specific information from user 55. I'm going to have to create a function that's going to have to loop through all of those and check the user ID. If it's 55, it's 55, it's 55. Now, I can actually specifically, when I'm entering this stuff into my JSON, I actually place the number or place the name directly right in here. It gives me the ability to go, I want to go right to user 55, bam, I'm indexed, and I pull the information. It's not sequential anymore. It's direct. So that'll speed you up a lot. So how I use these templates is, remember I told you that you can have other objects placed within other objects? So this is how I do it. So when the page starts, I go to that HTML block with all my templates and all my objects, and I store them into these variables that you see here. Now, I can at any time take other objects and also stick them inside. So for instance, I'm building one right here, the user badge. You'll notice line 31. Notice that I go and I grab the HTML code, so that the HTML template of the user badge, but then I search for one of my token replacements in there. And okay, there's a difference. This is just my technique. You don't have to use it. You saw earlier in my HTML that I was using square brackets for token holders. I actually use curly braces when I'm dropping other templates in. So I know the difference between what I'm using. You don't need it. I just do it because I like to be extra. So with that said, it pulls in another template called message, or drops something into message area. Let me just scroll this. Oh, it won't go over. We'll just manually go over there then. So notice it's pulling in, this is weird. It's pulling in the template message area inside this token. So let's go back to the HTML code. Take a look at our user badge. So here's all these regular, normal little placeholders where I'm going to stick data once the database serves me up some information. But here, you'll see that I can also stick my message area. So what is the message area? Every time you've seen in the activity side, that little message quote, it's in a white box, or you clicked on connect and you're typing in a message and that white box appears, that's actually a template. And that template is located, where are we? Down here. So I'm pulling this object in. Now, this object holds a whole bunch of little actors in it in of itself. When you are replying, it'll show you certain buttons, and when you're sending out a new message, it'll show you certain messages and things like that. And it too has tokens. So you can see that this is almost like creating building blocks that you can interswap amongst each other. Now, each of these have their own CSS block. So I'm going to actually kind of walk you through right now what the user badge has, and then I'll show you the CSS for the user badge, just so we can start from somewhere so you can get an understanding. Okay, Sharif, were you able to bring up that JSON? Oh, you were? Okay, well then, I guess I don't have to go into there. But I would like to show a badge, so if you can. Right. So we got a couple of these badges going on. If you were to, well, you actually can take a look at it. So if you want to take a look at, say, one of these user badges, right? So you see all these user IDs are in here and stuff like this. But how many messages do you have? Do you have 2? It's probably better if you go into the message, maybe into the message menu. Take a look at that object. Anyways, while he's moving around in there, let's look at the HTML here. So I go in, I have my wrapper. I go in and you'll see where the photo comes in. So there's my little photo bucket. And in that photo bucket, it has my user ID, so I know what it is, and it has an image tag. Nothing too crazy and fancy about that. That source, notice it's just a dot dot. I'm actually replacing that with the user image once it comes in. Then there's a section where I hold all your info. It's a pretty big section. There's a lot of stuff that goes in there. But notice I don't show them all the time. Another thing you'll notice is I don't have any on-clicks in here. I don't have any inline styles in here. I don't use them. Everything I do comes from CSS directly or comes from a JavaScript applying a class. And as for click events and any kind of other listeners, I store all those in a common file called my events file. I'm going to jump around a little bit, so you guys are going to have to kind of be limber with me. So I'll give you a quick peek at what the event file looks like. Let's see here. Let's blow this one up. So for the listeners, I have this in a separate file. You notice that across the top, you'll see that I've blocked off my CSS into one file, my infrastructure stuff into another, events, and my main JSS, which is kind of like my mainline code, and my HTML. Everything's segmented, and I pull them in differently. That way I can operate on them, and I know where certain methods and functions are held. So here's my first listener, body. So how many people here are using jQuery have been using jQuery since pre-172. Yep. Okay, so, and everybody else, I guess, is above that. So jQuery has gone through a lot of stuff. They've deprecated a lot of things, especially when it comes to handlers. They started off with bind and unbind. That's still there today. It's always been existing. I don't think they'll deprecate that. But there's also things that came in that were live and die, and now 172 and higher, I believe they're recommending on and off. So the good difference about 172 and higher is that they have delegates now for these listeners. So back in the past, when you wanted to apply a listener, and for those of you who may not know what a listener is or event handler, quick description is whenever you click on an object and you want to see it do something, you can either put an on-click event on there, or double-click or whatever it is, or you can use a listener. The listener is always running. It's checking out what's happening on the page. Anything that changes on the page, it's recording and relaying back to you if you're listening to it. So you have to create these listeners that listen to specific communications. Oh, they clicked on this button. Let's trigger this event. So right now, I'm using the delegate technique right now. And I'll tell you what the delegate technique does for you. When you're dealing with a web page where not all the objects exist on page load, even if you set up a listener on it and it doesn't exist yet. So let's say I put a listener on object A and I apply it. And now later on I AJAX object A into the screen. When you click on it, this will not fire. It will not fire because it didn't exist to begin with to get bound to that event. So what jQuery did was they included a delegate function. So what a delegate function does is you can tell the listener to listen to a parent container that does exist on page load. And then, so that's what I've done here. I've chosen body. Well, obviously, body is going to encompass everything I do. So this is going to listen to everything. And then I'm specifically going to listen within the body for these two object classes, or one's an input type, name type, and the other one's a class. So I'm listening for anything within that. Now, when the page loads and these two elements don't exist yet, that's fine. When they do come in, it will apply the bind to it. So now it will always work. And that happens especially in the streaming that we're using on Lucid Life because the badges are not always there. I could put a listener on a badge, but with all the badges coming later, I'd have to keep reapplying them every time a new badge comes in. That's pretty expensive and hair-raising, actually. So now we just go to that particular module, and I say all the badges within here, and it keeps it up to date. So there's something to look forward to. If you can see down here, what you want to do, too, is it does have an expense to using listeners. You don't want to have too many running at the same time because it will start to load down on the client side, right? So one good thing that I do, technique that I use, is I group my items. So for instance, I could have had a separate listener, separate handler for body data page, and another separate one for body LL slider. Just like down here, if you look at my user badge, I've attached it to body, and I have a whole bunch of different stuff I'm listening for over here. So I'm grouping them. So now you have one delegate, but it's actually checking a multiple of objects within it. That's the better way to go. So remember that technique. So that's basically how the events work. So anything that's a click item or a hover item or anything like that, you can put them to a listener. That way you have no code obstructive on your page whatsoever, and your template is gold. Also on top of that, I mentioned I don't have any CSS styling in there. So much like I handle my listeners over there, I do the same thing for CSS. So let's go back. So I class everything. If you notice, all these green dudes, they're all some kind of selector that I can grab onto, right? So I can grab classes on everything. The reason why I put classes on there is, A, we're going to go back to semantic HTML, right? I'm telling you, this is the gender in here. This is the age in here. It's specific. Robots will pick that up, believe it or not. Dates, block quotes, those kind of stuff. Even if it's like an icon, HTML5 has an I, which is an icon, which is probably used here somewhere. Make sure I use icons in my buttons. Yeah, so there's an I right there. And all of them have a class. Now this is using the Bootstraps icons. Got some great stuff from Hyperglyphics icons. Good stuff to use. Now let's scroll down so I can show you the CSS here. Let's pull this up. So the CSS for the user badge. Now, does anybody know that there is actually an equation to figuring out how to get to a particular element? So, for instance, there could be many ways to select a particular object. If I had an object that was in my body, and then in a div called head, and then in a nav div called nav, and then there was a button there that I wanted to click called home. So one way I could do it is I could just, and it was a class, I could just say .home. But I could have multiple homes. It's a class. There could be multiple ones on the page. So am I clicking all of them at the same time? Am I clicking just the first one, the last one? What do you want? If in CSS, I only said .home and applied it, but later on in that CSS, I applied .home again, basically it would engage the first one, and then it would also engage the second one. Understood? Correct. But if I had two body lines in my CSS, the first one was body.space.home, and the second one down the line was just .home, guess what? .home will not be used. The body will take over. So there's an equation to figuring this out, and most people don't understand that until they get intricate into CSS. There is a mathematical equation. The mathematical equation goes something like this. IDs are worth 100 points. Classes are worth 10 points. Elements are worth 1 point. So if you're doing a selector that's diversing through a series of buckets and containers to get to something, even if I can apply it by just adding more selectors before it to override something that's below. So I don't know if you guys have encountered this before where you're putting a class in and it doesn't seem to be taking. It's because that class may only have a score of 30, and a class that's way up in the top of the page may have a score of 110. It'll always override it. So keep that in mind when you're creating good CSS. There's a whole bunch of other cool things. I'm not going to get into that, but that's one of the good rules that you're going to want to know. And so you'll see in my CSS, you're going to say, well, why is this guy lining this right down? And the greater than sign means I'm going down to the next child level. And why am I doing it for everyone? Why don't I just say maybe user badge, use a space, and go right to badge main? Or the same thing, go right to my ID wrapper here and stuff like this. This is why. I'm making sure that this is my gold. This cannot be broken. I don't care what else you do to this, you can't break that. So it also helps me in my debugging. So if I'm trying to apply a class to override something, I'll know that it's not being overridden for certain reasons because I can see what's going on. Now, with that said, I do have overrides that override even this, where I'm going down item by item by item. There are ways to override it, and I know I'm not talking about using the important. This is where we use things like the containers. So this article, user badge, it's contained within itself, and these are its children all inside it. But I'm sticking the user badge into another container. And that container, there's multiple containers. Can we get split screen again, please? So, and we can just go to the stream view. You can close that. Thanks. So here you'll see I have two containers. The left side is the stream, and the right side is the activity. Those have a class of stream probably, and a class of activity probably. So all I have to do, if I want to override any of my article stuff here, is I would just have to do this and put my stream in here and space. Now I've overridden, and it doesn't matter where I put that, in my CSS, top, before, after, another file, doesn't matter, it will always override what's in my user. Those little set design guys, the little controllers and the classifiers I told you about, that's what they do. They override the template's CSS structure. So when I want to go to the profile view, or I want to look at a message item, or I want to go into the menu and look at the items in there, those are all badges. And depending on the container that I'm in, I apply a class that overrides the actual template objects classes. And that's how you get the different behaviors and looks and feels. And that's not obtrusive. There's no JavaScript involved. It's just smart planning. All right. What other tips can I give you here? Like I said, you want to try to minimize how many templates you have. And once you create a template and you have it in your HTML, you then inject it into your application var, right? So now you can reuse it. Guess what? Well, if I've injected it into my application var, why do I still have to have it exist in my HTML page? Well, I have a function that runs that collects all that stuff into the var, And then you can delete all those templates that are below. You can wipe them out of the DOM. Matter of fact, you can go one better. You can never have those exist in the DOM and just AJAX load them right into the var itself on page load. So that's another way we can keep a really slim, clean, lean page, right? So right now, if we were to look at my full HTML, you'd have seen a huge chunk of code. Like half of that, my home page would have been these templates and containers. But after it's done, you won't see any of those. It'll be a very, very clean structure. All right, so let's talk a bit now about the JavaScript. So let's go back to the events. So I told you I have an event page here that handles all my click events and hover events and all these kind of stuff. There's surprisingly not that many. I have a couple here. Obviously, I had to designate the user badge alone, had to get its own kind of body delegate because there's so much stuff in there. There's a whole bunch of different stuff like the search and logging in and the streams area. And oh, see, here's another example that I'm using where I'm grouping some of this stuff. So I'm delegating to streams, which exists on page load, but these LIAs only exist later on. But I break them up. There's several of them that I'm talking about here. I want to talk about the streams hot LIAs. I want to talk about the streams saved, and I want to talk about the streams, well, some streams hot but on a different page. So I do some different diversions. So it's best to put an if-else structure of some kind or a case switch structure inside those to deal with all the different manipulations. All right, let's move down now. So these are all just my listeners. Notice I don't have any real code in here. I'm basically just saying, oh, if you clicked on button from inside connections read messages connect lightbox, I want you to run a method, run a function. So I'm not inundating my listener with actual code. It's pretty stupid at this point. It just knows, oh, this was clicked. I'm supposed to send you to this function. So that's how you separate the actions layer from the actual doing the controls and doing the behaviors mode. So here you'll see I'm going to message reply. So let's go down here and see what's down here. So this is where my event listeners ends. Everything above this red is my listeners. Everything below this now, these are my handlers. So these guys above have directed me to run these things depending on what I've done. So in that message reply, there's a bunch of stuff that happens. I actually send all those listeners, I basically send the DOM object to the handler. That way I have all the information I need to know. Remember I have all those data containers in there that contain some information? Well, I'm going to get those now. So when I want to grab the sender ID of the message that you want to send to, that sender ID template had the user ID or the receiver ID in there. So I can just come in here and I can grab the sender ID, and then I can also grab message ID and whatever else I want to grab from an object. And then I can now create my object user variable, which I can now throw to a template. The template handler will grab all this information and just do the search and replace in that tokens. Really fast, really quick. So that's kind of how I'm doing it. I'm just grabbing the information and I'm displaying it somewhere else, and that's kind of how you populate your templates. I'll see if I don't know if I'll have enough time to go into actually showing you a full process of what happens from click to population, but you can see where you can reap the benefits, the rewards from having separate code like this, because now I can use that same object user in any template I want to. All right, so let's go back to the presentation here and see where we're at. Where are we? Okay, so we were talking a bit about semantic HTML. I gave you some ideas that you can use using descriptive classes. Okay, so amplifying your web app. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do to change the appearance, change the behavior of how your app works on different tablets and devices. Apple is one of the guys who have many different things you can do. So there's a couple things that I'm pulling out some of the main guys. So you have Apple Touch icon pre-composed. Basically what this is this is similar to having your own, I don't know if you've ever dragged an app out onto your desktop and it gives you an icon. If you actually provide the icon here, which is just a file, let's do that. You can actually tell it what you want your icon to look like when you drag it out. I'm going to give you a quick little take a look here at what we're doing for Lucid Life. And it would be in, sorry, I split these out into small little files just so we can get to these. Infrastructure, here we go. Let's blow this out. Okay, so let's take a look at how I actually set my foundation up for my page. I have the regular usual stuff, some metas, some titles, and blah, blah, blah. But then if we move down here, we'll see all my style sheets. And you should kind of follow this pattern too as well. So loading JavaScript is obviously larger and more cumbersome than pulling in some style sheets. So what I do is I pull in the style sheets first. Does anyone know why I pull style sheets in first? Common practice. While the page is loading, you want it to adhere to what your CSS is supposed to look like. If I was to put all my CSS at the bottom of the HTML page, well, the page DOMs will be loading, and obviously they're not going to look proper until the CSS gets loaded, and then they'll magically fix up. So if you ever hit a site that kind of looks all screwed up for the first second and then it appears better, that's what they're doing. They're setting the CSS down too far before the DOM's created. So I put all my CSS at the top. Notice I don't have any JS in my head, really, except for my modernizer. So all my JS happens at the bottom of the page. So all my HTML code would have been between this point, and all my scripts get loaded at the bottom. That way, at least a person can see the presentation of a page, and then you can load that stuff in the background when they're ready to click on something and have something happen. So let's go back to what I was originally here for, which was some of the Apple customizations, this group of stuff here. So they have a couple different icon sizes. Obviously, with different iPhones, you have different resolutions, you have HD, you have the Retinas, you have all these different things. So they allow you to be able to specify the app icon in a variety of different resolution sizes. Now, if you actually put the highest resolution in, it'll work for all the lower ones, too. So really, you don't need to do them all separately. What's this one here? Okay, so this is the icon precomposed PNG. Oh, that's another smaller one. Okay, the Apple Touch startup image. So this one I was playing with, and I don't know if I have it working on our app yet, but there's something that Apple implemented where I can put a splash page up while my app is loading and then tell it to remove it when it's complete. So that's another cool thing that I never knew. I found that out while doing this project, and so I wanted to try it out. Also, there's an Apple Mobile Web Startups bar style. So they have two styles, a black translucent, a regular default, and if you're on an iPhone, you'll see that they can hide and show the browser bar at the top, and you can actually make it look semi-transparent to see through to the bottom. So I've actually used that, the black translucent. So you can actually see through when the bar loads on. There's a couple things you can pick from. I had a question during the break coming from this gentleman who was asking me a couple things about, like, where do you find out all these little tidbits for doing things on, like, say, Android and Apple and stuff. And I'd love to be able to tell you, just go right here to this site. But really, most of the stuff you find out from people who try to submit apps and they get, whether they're rejected or they're suggested that you maybe want to tweak something, like the idea I told you where the icon should be 44 pixels or larger if you're clicking on them. So these things sometimes, they're not readily available, but they're out there. So take a look and try to do some searches. It'll enhance the way your app works. The viewport. So if anyone's worked with viewport before, you can actually tell an app on any phone, I don't want you to be able to zoom scale. I don't want you to. Actually, as a matter of fact, I tell it right here. I don't want you to zoom scale. But if I did want you to zoom scale, I could actually say yes to this instead of no. And I could set the scale level to I only want you to scale up 2 times. So you can play with that, and you can give it some kind of control over how the user uses the system. And you may need that, actually, for responsive web design. Because certain things, you don't want them to be able to scale out. All right, what's the next line here? And web mobile app capable. Yes. That's just another setting. And you know what? I'll probably provide, after post this, I'll probably provide some of the areas where I got some of this information so you can actually look at it yourself. Because it'll come in pretty handy and useful. I don't want to go into everything, but there's a lot of stuff, a lot of goodies there. All right, so that's basically my big block of code. This is my head tag, nothing much in there, and these are the JavaScripts that I'm applying. So let's just quickly look at this. Yeah, I'm using jQuery 2.2. I'm using Bootstrap. I'm pulling in this other version of Bootstrap, which enhances some of the stuff that they've had. I'm using sockets, Node, all that kind of jazz. Nothing too extra here. Some helpers. Some jcrop. Whenever you're uploading a file, I'm using jcrop to help crop the file out, stuff like that. Simple stuff. But these files are the actual files that I'm using. All segregated. So my main JS, like I said, is my main line. When you load in, it kind of tells you what you want to grab, what you want to do, and it goes down in a structured format. The utils are things like formatting a date string and things like that. All those utils go in that separate. And API, this is what I use to talk to the Node servers and stuff like this, and all that all that jazz. And events are the page that I was just showing you that has all the listeners for all the quick events that I want to have. And like I said, having all your events in one file in one method area means that I can transform that on the fly. I change one thing, it changes everything. I don't have to go into code back and forth at all. I can do everything from my events page. All right, what else were we at here? How are we for time there, Matthew? Okay, let's see here. I don't think I have anything left to show you, actually. I don't know where my... Oh, there it is. Amplifying, content containers. We talked about that. Templates and objects. We talked about that. Talked about non-obtrusive JS, just using classes to apply. CSS best practices. Namespacing. Namespacing is good. Quick note on namespacing. Notice how I had user badge, and then I have all my other stuff below it. Then I have another template called lightbox something, and then I have everything in. When you namespace, you can directly point to that, and now you know that nothing is going to touch that object. It's just like namespacing in regular coding, right? You want to use that in CSS. Clearing and overriding and handling third-party CSS stuff. I could go into and show it to you, but basically what I do is I clear all my CSS at the top of my block. Any third-party handlers, libraries that I'm pulling in, such as Bootstrap stuff, that I want to override their default things, I put them at the top of my CSS, and I globally do them there, and then I can work forward from that. And the object morphing, which I talked about, which is adding classifiers to handle putting classes here and there. I guess that might conclude. That's it. So now it looks like it's question time if anybody has any.
So first and foremost, thank you so much. Great job. But I do want to invite, obviously, your partner in crime up here to help answer any questions that the audience might have. So I think you also had a method of doing this through your application.
So we were going to do it, but obviously the Wi-Fi kind of thing.
Yeah, Wi-Fi's kind of weird. Okay, does anybody have any questions for them? Yes, at the back.
Okay, I'll show you really quickly. Oh yeah, so the question here was, am I using media queries and tagging in my responsive design CSS? I am. I use it sparingly, and I can give you a quick example of where I'm using it. Let's see, let's go to CSS. I'll have to blow this up. Might not be in this, it might not be in this particular snippet of code, unfortunately. Sorry? Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. I was getting problems.
Everybody keep a keen eye for the password for the server.
No. So, let's do this. Firebug. Oh, I won't be able to blow this up. Oh, really? Does it work in there too? Oh, wrong thing. Wrong thing. There we go. There we go. Nope. It doesn't. Oh, well, unfortunately. Okay, well, to answer your question. Oh, that's why. Okay. So to answer your question, yes, I do use MIDI queries. I use them sparingly, and I'll tell you where I use them. In my CSS, which I can actually show you here. Oh, yeah, I do have media query going on. Okay, so in my CSS, I'll show you here. I'll go back to the user badge. So notice here, I have my regular CSS block. Then I have my alterations. So the alterations come from those controller objects I was telling you about. So I know that these are my container alter. Oh, I got to blow this up for you. Sorry. Let's get bigger. There we go. So this is really big. So here's my container alterations. So notice how I said that I namespaced everything to article. But then I'm in the container stream activity, so I can override this. These are my overrides. On top of that, I have some page alterations. So depending on what page you're actually on, I add that too in front of that. Now, when it comes to the media query, here I go. I add that afterwards. I have my media query alterations. So here I'm picking out between certain resolutions. 480. I'm focusing here primarily on a tablet and portrait mode. And the 360, I'm handling stuff like regular phones in their portrait modes. So, yeah. And that's how I'm handling my media query events right here. What I do is I attach anything that rectifies or transforms or does anything to an object, I apply them right directly under that object, so I know exactly where they are. And then with my next object, which is Connect Lightbox, I do the same thing. I have my regular Connect Lightbox information, and then you'll see I do a body change here. Actually, that's a cool thing that I want to show you. So, did I answer your question, by the way?
Yeah, my second question was why are you, what was the reason and rationale for using media query as a experiment?
So, well, it comes down to how I decided. Oh, yeah, so he wants to ask me how would I, or what was my reasoning for applying my media query so sparingly, apart from keeping my sanity. Well, the thing with handling with media query is, yes, you can do global things with media query, right? So I do a few global things with media query, knowing max widths and heights, and I apply a certain class to the body tags only. I don't necessarily use them to apply to individual object classes down below. I let the controller objects do that. So that's how I handle it, right? I'm being more specific with how I control objects, right? Rather than globally, I'm doing it specifically. So that's just my preference, but you can go either way. I like to kind of keep all my rectifiers in the same area rather than all over the place. Okay, next question. So great stuff. I love that stuff because especially when you're developing a new product and you don't know when you're going to be changing classes and you can have some set variables and stuff. The question was that what do I think about using Sass and SCSS and things like that, less, more, that kind of stuff. Great things to use. The only thing is, in the term of, say, pushing something really quickly, sometimes it's good and sometimes it hinders you. And it really depends on how experienced you are with it. I'm probably not that experienced with actually going in and doing a lot of the more complicated stuff within less, more Sass and CSS. But if I was, I would probably use a lot more. So I do recommend using it. It gives you a central area where you can make all your changes, and then you can push them. I just didn't want to go through the fact that I have to always push it out, right? So I was avoiding that. But yes, I would use it.
How are you going to solve like retina images for your icons and stuff like that?
Okay. So the question is approach for handling resolution, different HD, density, and stuff like that. So the technique that I normally use is that would be something that I use at a body level. So at a body level, I would use Modernizer or my own user agent snooping to kind of figure out what resolution I'm in. Am I in a 1.0, 1.2? I'm in a higher dot pitch. And depending on that, I will apply a class called HD to the body. That class being applied to the body automatically cascades down to my object that has the icon image in it, and it will automatically change that stuff. So that's kind of technique that I use.
Are you using like background images then, or are you using actual like images?
So you can go both ways. So the background way, okay, so he's asking me if I'm using background images or if I'm using actual full image in the front. So there's a couple ways that you can do this, and I know you're aware. One way is the background way is the easy way, because you can just change the CSS. The harder way is making an image, and now I have to get obtrusive with my JavaScript. So whenever JavaScript sees HD in the body tag, I'm going to actually search through every image source, and I'm going to basically replace a .hd or an @hd in the extension, and it'll actually replace the image that's being loaded. So that's another technique. There's a third technique too, but I don't want to talk about it because it's still exploratory. But you can come to me after this. All right. Are there any other questions? Oh, got one here.
Excuse me if you already said this, but for like laying out what you're about to design, are there any tools you use besides Photoshop?
Okay, so the question is, are there any tools that I use to lay out my structure, my architecture that I want to build from? I didn't actually talk about it. I did want to. It was back in the documentation level where mock-ups are everything, especially when you don't have a product yet. You diagram everything. Believe it or not, I'm an avid enthusiast of Google Docs, and they have an excellent application there that you can use. I've used it to do the presentation before, and I've used it other times to do it. It's almost like having a mini Visio. So that's what I use, and I just kind of lay out my stuff really quick and easy. I do have a technique that I use, though, where I do identify my actors that this is an object, this is a template, this is this, so I kind of apply a bit more to my UI on that front, but I don't use anything special. You can use anything. And I think there was a question here.
Yeah, are there any tools that you would use, getting back to tools that you would specifically for unit testing, but specifically for responsive design?
So So the question was, are there any tools that we can use to specifically test, debug, QA for responsive design. Basically other than the browser techniques that I showed you there, that's really all you have. There are some things that are in the make. I'm trying to remember the name of one of them right now, but it's more just a validator. It doesn't really help you with any of the responsive design. If anyone wants to build that, there is an opening in the market for it. Actually, let me write that down right now. All right, good question though.
Yes. Actually, center middle here. Yes.
Oh, sure.
I was wondering if you could recommend or introduce a lightweight framework for responsive design besides Bootstrap, because that seems to be a lot more full featured.
So even within Bootstrap, so I told you there's some other branch offs, right? Some other users have come in and pulled it out. ANSI steps it up and things like that. There are some that actually step down. So I can't recall some of the names to some of them right now, but if you do want to follow along the Bootstrap family of things, go to their GitHub and take a look at the searches, and you'll see some of the other branches that are coming out of that thing that actually reduce some of the coding. But you can go into things such as, there's one called Barracuda, and there's ones, I think that's the fish. There's one that's very slim, and it just deals with the grid system. There's some that deal with just handling behaviors, like kind of like a modernizer, but handles more the behaviors and things like that. And if you come to me after that, I can give you some, and I'll probably post a lot of my answers after this up on our website, so you can always go and take a look. All right. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Over here.
I refuse to exist to acknowledge people who are on inferior browsers. No, but honestly, good question. The fact is that I don't use too much JavaScript, period. As you've seen, I barely touch it. So there's not much that it would hinder. The only things that it would hinder are the major events that I'm using the delegate structure from the new jQuery, and that would cause a problem. Once again, though, I am catering towards the newer technologies and things like that, and I specifically wanted to design for new technology, so I'm leaving behind the guys who are not CSS3 and HTML5 compliant, because they should be. So that's to answer your question.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. So responsive design is on multi-platform design, mobile, and desktop. So this session mostly is talking about like custom layer or UI exercise. So I'm more interested in seeing responsive content in different platforms. For example, like in mobile, it's very limited for bandwidth, it's lightweight, and the CPU is really not as powerful as desktop. So it can consume that much data.
Right.
I was wondering, did you ever do any project something like this, have a pattern that apply responsive content to between desktop and
Okay, so the question is a long one. I'll try to paraphrase it. The question is being posed that how do you handle responsive content between mobile devices and computers, because mobile devices are a bit more limited and things like that with space and with CPU and stuff like that. So I do that a little bit on Lucid Life. I'll bring it up for you right now. Whoa, that's really big. Okay, but it's big, it's good. So if you notice that, well, I can't show you because I don't have a mobile device up on our screen here. But when you open up the messages here, you see how when I hover, oh, I'm way too big here. Way too big. You see how when I hover over, I'm giving some other actors some buttons that you can click on? If you're on an actual phone, notice I don't even have those in the object. So I reduce a lot of things, and you just click on the message to open up a lightbox separately. So I am keeping in mind that I have certain real estate that I have to work within. And that's where all those actors come. If I was able to show you that actual CSS, you could see that.
how do you achieve that by JavaScript?
No, that's all CSS. Yeah. So and object, and which object I want to apply. So in certain aspects, I may not drop the template. So I'm using JavaScript to apply or not apply a template to the object I'm showing. But I'm not using JavaScript to change what's on the screen.
So JavaScript is like a controller, like putting which template that you want to put in.
Exactly.
That's not a template for
Exactly. So I have a controller in this mail message, my mail message controller, and it says, okay, am I portrait? Am I landscape? Am I on a phone? Where am I? Okay, get this template, stick this stuff in because I'm on desktop. Give me everything. But I'm on a phone. Okay, I want to get the raw one and put that one up. Regular JavaScript. It's just a technique that you use to do that. That's how I broke up those actors and controllers.
That too, but usually like reusing JavaScript and just put in different content.
Yeah, no.
Kind of slow down the process.
Yeah.
It's a smaller page, and then you have to do anything call different content template in your large scale project and slow down.
Exactly. All right. I'd be happy to talk to you about that after if you're going to stick around. You have some other questions I want to get through before we go off here?
I think we've got time for one more question, and then I do actually have, I hope you guys have a question from the presentation you thought of. Yeah? Okay.
You're going to ask me a
I
question.
do have a
ask a
giveaway
question.
book here, Functional JavaScript. So we do have that available after one more question from the audience.
I guess you're the winner.
Yes.
So when you hover over those messages, right?
Yeah.
You hover over the second message, right? The buttons will appear, right? Isn't the same view on mobile?
No. So on mobile, you don't get those buttons. You have to click on the actual message, and then a pop-up comes up. So, but here, I can make you reply directly. So it's a bit smarter on desktop. When I click reply, it'll actually open the message light box and open the message and give you the area where you can write. So it does a bunch of other stuff on it.
The mobile is a totally different experience.
Oh yeah, it's a completely different experience. And you had a question?
Yeah, can you hear my?
Afterwards, we're going to see if we can actually hook a mobile phone up as well. I do have the capabilities, but the bandwidth we couldn't be able to. But for the question, first of all, again, round of applause. Great presentation. Great job for this.
Thanks.